Should teams keep their top draft picks or trade for an instant impact player? This one's a tough one. I mean, I think it just varies every year. It's really most dependent on the strength of the draft.
Yeah.
And this year, this is leaning towards a very historically weak draft. I think a lot of times teams fall into this trap of being drawn into potential, drawing into the charm of a young player where they have the potential to be the face of the franchise. But there's so much more chance of a player being drafted being worse than them being better than you expected. So it's a really tough thing to avoid. And a lot of teams we've seen fall victim to it several times. And so it's tough. And not to mention this year with COVID-19, it's become even more difficult to gauge the talent of these players. We haven't had a combine. We haven't had pre-draft workouts. Really, most of the decisions are going to be based off tape, watching the scouting or looking at the scouting reports, watching the tape. These teams aren't going to be able to have the workouts that we had in the past, which makes it even more chance of the player being a flop. Not to mention, usually when you have these very talented drafts, there usually still is a coherent number one first pick that's almost guaranteed to get to be the first pick.
Yeah.
But for months, I have heard so much speculation. I mean, is it going to be Wiseman? Is it going to be Ball? Is it going to be Anthony Edwards? It's really up in the air. And so that's indicative of maybe a concerning trend. I can't promise you that it's going to work out. And not to mention, we have seen that the most effective way to change a team for the better is through trade.
Mm-hmm.
In this draft in particular, teams should be looking to trade their picks for players that they know will be instant impact players. Not to mention, looking at the free agent pool for this year, who's going to be a free agent in 2020.
Yeah.
It's not looking too nice. I mean, we have probably the best player being DeMar DeRozan, assuming without a doubt that Anthony Davis is going to re-sign with the Lakers or something.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of
no room for speculation there.
Right.
So DeMar DeRozan, who's growing older, likely being the best player. When next year we have Giannis and a bunch of other players, why would you bank on free agency this year? Trade for a player that can be the face of your franchise, even making small level trades that prepare you for the next offseason. You can make a very strategic move, but I wouldn't bet on this draft. The second best player too in free agency, Draymond.
Yeah.
If that's not indicative of the strength of this free agency, I don't know what is. So I'm saying that teams really should anticipate lots of trades close to the draft. I think unless it's pretty top heavy, not to mention too. So if you're not within the top three, I don't see much value in you keeping your pick this year.
No, I certainly agree with most of that as well. I think a lot of people have that undue idea of I'm now have the opportunity, you're drafting at 14 through 16, like I'm going to get my franchise guy, and statistically, you're not even likely to really draft an all-star. You're much more likely to draft someone who is at best a role player. But I do think there's more things to think about. I don't think necessarily, you have a top draft pick, you should trade it right away. I don't think it's that black or white reasoning for it. And part of that can just be seen if you look at the draft order, specifically at the top, very rarely do teams automatically trade their draft pick. So if it truly was an objective right thing for them to do, not many of them do it. Many of them still keep their draft picks. There is some moving around a little bit, but for the most part, it usually stays the same way, and they usually don't trade it out. And I think there's multiple reasons really for that. The first is, we talk about getting an instant impact player through the draft or just by trading your draft picks, and that's pretty hard. I mean, if you go on precedent and look at some of the biggest trades that have got on, I think the two biggest ones lately have been Paul George and, of course, Anthony Davis, both LA, which is kind of funny. But in order to get those two players, they had to empty their entire team. I mean, to get Paul George, it took Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Gallinari, and 5 first-round picks. That is so much. That just goes to show that, one pick, one top first-round pick doesn't really mean that much. And I think we all know how Lakers just emptied their house to the point where, what was it? I think they had 3 players on their team at one point when they were getting Anthony Davis. So it just kind of goes to show that, they aren't worth that much. And sometimes then you want to weigh the pros and cons of should you keep it. And then you want to look at things like the draft. This is a historically weak draft, what it's looking like. So you're going to want to take that into consideration. But if you are drafting 14, 15, and, it's oftentimes, and I've never seen like a 1-to-1 trade, the 12th, 13th pick of the draft for this, not even fringe all-star, but just role player. Very rarely does that happen, and it makes teams really consider, like, maybe I should just draft here. But other than that, there's other things to consider. I mean, first of all, these players are going to be a lot cheaper when you're on your rookie deal. I mean, if you're drafting 1, 2, 3, they're still going to be a lot cheaper than a lot of role players on your team. I mean, we can take our guy DeAndre Ayton, who was drafted first. I mean, I think he only made about $6.7 million a year on his rookie deal. Of course, that's minus any incentives or anything like that. So they're a lot cheaper. If you are having trouble with that cap space, especially if you already have a star there that is going to either on the max deal or is going to get the max contract soon, getting these cheaper draft picks, I think, is something that's important. And other than that, I think you have to remember that this is a business and there are other things to consider. Sometimes these young players just bring that spark that is so necessary. That chance that this is a good player can be exciting for a franchise. A lot of the teams that are drafting high, a lot of them are small market teams who just need some sort of spark. And we've seen this done through the Ja Morants and Trae Youngs of the world. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't put enough emphasis on. I see a lot of right now LaMelo Ball looking like he's going to be one of those top picks maybe to the Timberwolves. And I think that's much more of a business perspective thing. Wherever LaMelo Ball goes, the eyes and TV ratings that are going to go there is going to really enhance that franchise. So I don't think it's that clear cut of an answer, but it certainly goes draft by draft. So I get what you're saying too.
I think it's tough though. I mean, look at Trae Young. He's a very talented guard. He's probably top 5 guards in the East.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hawks are terrible. They're terrible, which shows that it can't be always relying on a young player who doesn't have the expertise in leading a team to success. Oftentimes, the smaller a culmination of smaller trades or trading for someone with known winning tendencies can be more powerful than making the important draft pick. And I'm not saying that people, 15 through 30 should trade their picks because I don't know if their picks have much value in this draft. Right. It's the high lottery picks that, the 1 through 5, the 1 through 10.
Right.
I think that the value isn't really there this year. So I'm curious to see how this plays out.
See that.
And I'd be very happy if all the first 10 picks proved me wrong and were very talented.
Statistics aren't in that favor, though.
Yeah,
I don't think that could happen.
This is coming from a guy who's seen the Suns draft in the top 10 countless times in recent history and recent memory, and most of those players not being on the roster anymore. So
yeah,
I have seen firsthand the excitement and the allure of a top pick turn into a crushing disappointment. But I mean, there also are the surprisingly talented players who go top 10 who you don't think have much upside, like the Lowry Markkanens of the world, the Aaron Foxes, who aren't maybe the top 3 picks but have a lot of value. I mean, you can even look at the Donovan Mitchells, Devin Booker going 13th. It's not always clear cut who is the best player in the draft. That's why I'm skeptical of teams drafting through the lottery, because it's very rare that the first pick in the draft is the best player.
Right.
It's so much based on speculation. It's so much based on a small sample size of their play that it's, especially this year, that it's becoming increasingly more difficult.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm excited for some of the players in the draft. I mean,
oh yeah. I'm
as
really
a,
excited to see what LaMelo Ball does.
obviously LaMelo Ball
Like,
is
everyone's got their eyes on there. I mean, I think when I think about this whole thing in totality, I think what you're saying of trading that draft pick is probably the safer option. You know, you're getting a known commodity. You know what they're going to bring to the table. You know what their
sure.
career average is. But in basketball, from what we've seen lately, the kind of teams that don't play it safe and decide to swing for the fences have that chance of getting that star player. You know, if you're a horrible team and you get just a borderline, just a role player for some top draft pick, you're probably not going to do that well. You need to get and take the chance to get a top player. So you brought up Trae Young. You know, they could have traded that and gotten a decent player, but they traded that, got an amazing player, and yeah, they still aren't that good record wise, but in the future, they have someone to build upon. They have the face of that franchise. And the only way you get that face of that franchise is by taking the risk in drafting a player. It's not getting a role player or a known commodity. So that's kind of how I see it there. But then again, as we're saying, you know, it does come back down to the draft and seeing what's best for your team. You know, situationally, are you a team that is just stinking and can take the risk, or are you more of a contender? You know, I think the Warriors have a very compelling argument that they've got a good squad and they could maybe trade for a couple good role players to make themselves even deeper. And I
Yeah,
think that's something, it really goes on a team by team basis,
absolutely.
but I think you got to take the risk sometimes.